Hello, everyone. Good morning, good well, and good welcome. Is that a word? It is now to Weekend Winters. I am Christy Winters, and it is the weekend. It is Sunday. Hello, and how are you? And I hope you are well, wherever it is, whenever it is you are. Don't know if you guys can tell the difference. I've got a new webcam. So I don't know who it was last week who recommended this webcam to me, but I've put it in. It's got a little ring light. It's freaking awesome. I've had to change my lighting a little bit, but I don't care. I am very happy with this. Yes, and I hope you guys are all doing well. So, yes, so hi to Transcream Girl. Hello, my dear. Also, DN Fan. And who's getting their drink on tonight? Would that be you? All right, I can see you in the chat. And hello, City Life as well. Good morning. I guess I could go ahead and share you guys on the screen. That would probably be nice. Let me see if I can sort myself out in that way. No, because I haven't moved my camera over to every single one, so I'm gonna have to fill a little time while I do that. Actually, I can do it over like this. So let me go ahead and transition to screen so you guys can see yourselves. All right. So first, let's have a little chat about moving forward. So, been having a bit of a think about what to do on the channel going forward now that it's not election time. See, in an election time, it's really easy for me to come up with content. Should I switch this? Actually, what I think I'll do is I will just minimize. Sorry, I'm going to futz with the screen while I talk to you guys because I can multi. Something like that. All right. So yes. And actually what I might do is hold on to the chat, hold on to your seats. Whoop! I'm gonna move you over. Oh, you haven't seen that yet. Or did you? I can't tell, because I think you might be on the same screen. Alright, there we go. Now you guys can see yourself, and I can see you too, and I'll blow you up a little bit more so you can see yourselves. Yeah, 150. Hey y'all. Yeah, so during an election year, I really don't have any problems coming up with content because elections, that's what I do. It's my favorite thing ever. Moving forward, though, it's not always a guarantee that I'll have something to talk about. There won't necessarily be polls. I'm still working out this camera a little bit, where the setting of it. Yeah, that seems okay. All right, so yeah, I haven't. So moving forward, let me just tell you a little story about what it's like to be on YouTube, and then I'll get to your questions if you have any. When I first joined YouTube, there was very little, if any, feminist content, and feminists that were posting would get immediately picked up by channels like Bearing and Sargon. Who else was running at the time? There were a bunch of just POS kind of people who were operating, and they were just trolling for any kind of feminist content to dehumanize people and mock people and target them for harassment, because they just led squads of bullies. They were there to bully people off of YouTube because for them it was like a safe space for fragile masculinity. And so when I first got on the channel, I started with my atheism content and then met up with basically the people who were defending feminism. And as a consequence, it was easier to, it was sort of the era of the response video. There were still a lot of response videos being made, and there was quite a small but very active community of people who were challenging this sort of edgelord perspective. There was Steve Shives, I guess I would put up there. ContraPoints was not even sort of like hadn't transitioned yet. Their channel was still quite small. Now Natalie's channel. Kevin was doing his Descent of Manosphere. There was someone called Laughing Witch who was doing stuff. Chrisiosity was first emerging. Demotivator Opinion was coming forward. Danny Quartz was doing some stuff. There was Tom Avery, I want to say, was doing some stuff. I don't even know if they're making content anymore. Myself. And so there was kind of like this group of people, very small channels, but people who had aligned almost because we were being targeted by the edgelord class. And in that class, I would put Shoe on Head, Armored Skeptic, Chris Raygun, the Amazing Atheist. And a lot of it was countering their propaganda. Undoomed, yes, yes. Thank you, DN fan. Yeah, absolutely. Undoomed was that, and then later on, No BS came up and kind of did the same sort of stuff in that vein as well. And that was the Obama era, basically the Obama era. There were people who were doing anti-fascist things on YouTube. Kevin's always been very strongly anti-fascist. But fascism. Oh God, Thunderfoot! How could I forget Thunderfoot? Yes, Transgamer Girl, absolutely, Thunderfoot. Yeah, Thunderfoot really was, in some ways, like the preeminent. It sort of it came out of Gamergate. If I'm really going back, if you go back farther from feminism, it really sort of started with the targeting of Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn in Gamergate, and then they just looked for more people to target, and they just went more broadly out at feminists because, again, fragile masculinity. Yes, absolutely. And then because it was almost like, when you had someone competent in office, you had space to deal with some of these other issues. And a lot of it, I'm going to be, it was very white centered. It, there was some discussion of issues of oppression, but at least, in our group, it was, other than our loose association with T1J, who is a great content creator, and he's gone on to kind of get out of politics, and he was always sort of like one toe in. He wasn't a purely political channel. He did Disney stuff and life commentaries and, and those sorts of things. But yeah, it was heavily, I think it was a very white-centered perspective. It didn't really take on, it was almost like a white feminist reaction in some ways. And then we started defending things more like intersectionality. And, at least for me, it felt like it was pretty focused on an anti-Gamergate extension of an attack on feminism. And then when Trump came to office, at least for me, fights on YouTube became secondary to fights in real life. And that is also when YouTube changed its mode of broadcasting. They allowed people to do live streams. And so you didn't have to make a prepared video to make a lot of content. And from that came things like, on my channel anyway, the happy hour. Kevin and I doing hangouts became much easier over time. And especially with Trump just every day doing 4 or 5 things that were shocking and outrageous and norm-breaking and offensive and harmful, and increasingly harmful as his administration went on. You didn't have time. By the time you researched an issue and wrote up a script and recorded it, and then you added your visuals and you edited it all together, it was like 4 days later and people had forgotten about it. So in a lot of ways, I felt like the Trump administration, combined with the changes to YouTube to facilitate more live streaming, really allowed us to do more real-time reactions. Now, the downside of these real-time reactions is that you don't get a chance to do the sort of in-depth focused looks. You end up, we create 3-hour happy hours, which is great if you're there and you're live. But if you, I don't know, if someone's just going along and they see a 3-hour program, even if it's funny, that's a big commitment. And so personally myself, I've been wrestling with the ease of doing live shows like this versus the benefit of doing a more targeted, prepared video. And for work reasons, because I've had a lot of deadlines in 2009, and I've also been writing a lot in 2020, I've tended toward the live programming. But I'm not thinking about redoing my channel or anything, but I am thinking about creating more space to do more focused videos, or some sort of combination where, I do think it would be good now to start getting back a little bit into the debunking. And I also kind of want to do some nerdy stuff. So I'm thinking about maybe going forward, creating more of a structure, at least for 2021 on this channel, where we would pick, either by a poll or some recommendations or my own, what I see is to take a Tim Pool clip or a Sargon clip or whomever, you guys recommend, or maybe is circulating for the day, and look very narrowly, because you can't do the whole videos. This is it. They just spew so much crap. But for the first half of the show, kind of doing a debunk. You can, I get, the long form. So okay, the long form content has its place, and I don't want to get rid of like the happy hour, and I don't want to get rid of the trash movies. But I think it would be good for me if I could pull something out that's a 20-minute clip, and use that for somebody who's coming to my channel. Because also when I moved to D&D, I'm getting some erosion in my channel. I'm not making as much content, especially with Kevin not working. We've moved the happy hour over to his channel. So I'm just trying to think of how I can get more bite-sized information out there that's more suited to someone who doesn't have 3 hours. So I don't want to end up, hello Sophia, I don't want to, an Enheim is fluffy, I don't want to stop this, but I'm just trying to think of ways to accommodate different types of viewers. And also to do more regular content now that the election is gone, because again, I can always talk about, sampling frames or the problems with exit polls or the latest results. That's not a big deal, but I think it would be helpful maybe to kind of draw people in and give the show some structure. So yeah, I'm thinking about doing that moving forward. And then the other thing that I still want to pick up, and I'm not sure now, I know I talked about this, I think last week, is picking up with the social construction of reality, which is a very heavy and very dense book. And I'm trying to figure out ways of making that more accessible, but it's also very complicated. And I don't want to give a misimpression by eliminating information. So I was thinking about maybe doing the social construction of reality in the second half of this show, but in all honesty, maybe on a Sunday morning, that's not where people are. And I need to, do a separate series on that. So yeah, going forward, I'm just also thinking about how to do more of the 2-camera videos and mixing up the content a little bit. How to, you want to stay relevant and fresh on YouTube. And the other thing, obviously, is I'm approaching 50. Is my demo is not 20-something-year-olds, guys. Like, I am not, I know that a lot of YouTube politics that at least the politics I sort of swim in, and there are people that I'm more Black content creators. I don't have a lot of content with like Latinx content creators, but it's a lot of cis white guys. Lots and lots and lots of cis white guys, and their audience are white guys. And they're under 30 somethings. And that is not my demo, and I can't compete with that. I'm not going to compete with Vosh in terms of the demo he's pulling in. I'm not going to compete with the serfs in terms of the kinds of people that they're looking to attract. And I know that they think very much about that demographic because they're part of that demographic. But there are other people on YouTube. And there's other people on YouTube that want content, right? Besides a typical sort of white lower middle class to middle class, high school to college aged edgelord who doesn't know much about it. Basically Xanderhall. I mean, think about Xanderhall for me demographically, and that is the demo I think that, the serfs are pulling in, Vosh is pulling in. And that is the biggest demographic on YouTube. But there are other people who need content. And so I'm starting to think about a bit more about what I can do for the next 12 months to make that content. So yeah, I see Trans Gamer Girl had a comment here. I had issues with Anita's TV WIGVD series and TJ Thunderfoot Carl Gunn Act found their way into my recommended, and I started buying into their brand of BS. Yeah, but that came crashing to a crashing end when the racism and transphobia started to ramp up. Absolutely. I think that, there's, I'm, all right. I said I was going to take your questions, but it just ends up being Christy Ramble show. I have put in for I've got 9 days of paid vacation left this year. And I, on the assumption that 2021 we're not really going to be able to move around in any meaningful way for the end of the year, I just thought, okay, I'm going to take my holiday and use it up. So I start next year with, like no days held over. So from the 15th of December until the 2nd of January, I am on holiday. Because the way that the Christmas and the New Year holidays work, I've got 3-day weeks for the last 2 weeks of December. And then I can take 3 days off until starting on the 16th. So I think the 15th of December is my last day of work. And then I'm going to have basically a half a month off, which is going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to it. Where was I going with this? But in terms of kind of coming up with some structure, finishing up hopefully the social construction of reality by the end of the year is a goal of mine, and getting out some more content. I had a point, and then I started talking about my holiday, and I absolutely forgot what it was going to be. But anyway, yeah. So look for, I guess, a bit of a tweaking coming up on my channel, but I'm not going to stop the Sunday show, and I'm certainly not going to stop D&D because I love that. And I'm not going to stop the happy hour, and I'm not going to stop trash movies, which kind of leaves when will I have time to do other videos? But maybe with the calming down of everything, a happy hour will become a twice weekly, and then trash movies twice per month, and then that will leave me a bit more time. Oh, it was about demographics. Yeah, demographics. So with the demographics on YouTube, I want to go for a different demographic. I don't want to exclude the kind of Surfs, Vosh, Xander Hall kind of group. I know that politics on YouTube tends to skew more toward cis men, and also younger, and also white, in terms of where I'm focusing right now. But I'm hoping to, broaden the kinds of people who want to watch my content. And we'll see how that goes, because, Trumpism isn't going anywhere. And certainly racism and fascism haven't disappeared just because of an election. So there will be some need for that. And obviously there will need to be a kind of debunking. So the thing about the debunking videos is if you do get Tim Pool debunked, you're going to pull some viewers in who watch Tim Pool's content and want to come and sort of, I got a good question from That's Terrorist Bro, but want to, go in and maybe defend or check out what the critique is. And so it's good for pulling in people who are looking for a critique of Tim Pool or for Sargon. So I do feel like there is a need for those kinds of debunking videos still, but I don't want them to be aimed at the same demo. So That's Terrorist Bro says, Christy, what do you make of the idea of political YouTube being a site of masculine gender socialization? Absolutely. And debate being a way for some persons to achieve masculinity. I think that that's 100% correct. I think there's a lot of BD energy in some of these spheres. And, Kevin and I have criticized Vosh repeatedly for the fact that although I think he uses he, tries to be leftist on identity politics, obviously slips into a real kind of edgelord version of masculinity. And let's talk about what that kind of toxic masculinity is. It occurs to me, if you look at what the attributes of the toxic version of masculinity's ideals are, you basically get a sociopath with power issues, like domination issues. There's no emphasis on emotional connection and nurturing. There's about providing, but providing, although, obviously providing housing and food and clothing is necessary for life, there's no idea of the kind of emotional connection and nurturing that goes along with that kind of stuff. So degrading the feminine, looking at anyone who does play a more receptive, submissive, or a more receptive kind of role is submissive and therefore can be dominated. And so I absolutely think that the whole debate me bro ownage culture is an old-fashioned version of a gunslinger fight. You see who's the quickest on the draw, and bum 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 bum. And what you get measured on isn't how close you are to empirical reality or to the facts or your command of the topic. look at how Sargon reacts to me when he gets to the point where he doesn't have any more arguments. He just starts to make personal attacks because his audience isn't motivated by learning. They want to degrade others in order to feel better about themselves. So yeah, I think that in terms of the worst elements of a toxic masculine socialization norm structure, that the edgelord part of YouTube is invested in that kind of notion of masculinity. They define themselves by their contempt for others, by their selfishness, by their ability to humiliate and degrade others, to put others in their place, as opposed to putting arguments down or defeating arguments. So absolutely, I think that that's a very, very, very on point observation. Ms. Fluffy, I just found you and Kevin, and I really want to know your origin stories. Well, I don't know how far back you want me to go, but I can tell you how I met Kevin, as it were, on YouTube. So in terms of that, I don't know if that's what you mean, but I can give you a little bit of background since it is a hi JMM. It's a Q&A episode, because honestly, I didn't, with all the election stuff and everything else, I didn't have time to prepare anything, and I was thinking, oh, I could do voter fraud, but it's so complicated and there's so much of it, and if I just wait like 2 more weeks, there will be some good summaries. I stopped. Oh, sorry, just really quick. Chris LaFord, think of Katie Porter and her whiteboard. Figure future. Okay, that's a good question, Chris. I will come back to that. And Trans Gamer Girl, I stopped watching Vosh for the way he treats his own audience. Yeah, I had just gotten out of an abusive relationship. I didn't need a parasocial one. Like when I saw how he treated Warren supporters, it does, it just, and maybe he's changed, but Vosh, it's not easy. It doesn't take much for him to drop the mask and for the absolute contempt for other people, as opposed to an empathetic desire to see other people built up come in. It just took Warren, making him mad, and Warren supporters to making him mad too. He was talking about P flaps on seats and all this sort of stuff. So, yeah, don't have much time for Vosh. And I don't care how popular he is. I don't care, he appeals to his demo and feeds into that, and that's fine. And I can criticize him just like I'm criticized, Peter. When they, oh my gosh, Peter Coffin, they're out there supporting financially transphobes right now and getting dragged for it, and fine. Yeah, you should. If you're going to stand up for someone who says transphobic things and you give them money via Patreon, yeah, you should be held accountable. So, I just kind of I kind of want to focus on my side in creating that kind of content. But the Kevin and Christy origin story from my side of it, I don't know what Kevin's side of it is, but my side of it was, 2000, I'd moved to Germany, and living in Germany at the time, I didn't have access to a lot of English language television, and I ended up watching a lot more YouTube. When I was in the UK, I would watch the BBC and Channel 4 and ITV and everything else on the box, like the little free view box. But here, I really ended up relying a lot more on YouTube for English language content. And I had been going through my new atheism phase, found Steve's content, I think, first. And I used to watch actually some of the Thunderfoot videos on creationists, why people laugh at creationists or whatever it was. And I actually binged a whole lot of Armored Skeptic videos back when Armored Skeptic would just basically read out of a textbook. As long as you give him a script, he's got a great voice and he can make jokes, but you ask that guy to think for himself and it just starts to go down immediately. And I was actually Steve Shive's very first patron. If you go back, you don't have to, but his first video of when he opened up his Patreon account, and the first name he read was mine. So I was out there supporting his work on New Atheism, and I had got my channel going. I'll give you a kind of I don't need to go into details of the content I was creating. It was mostly atheism with a feminist spin on it. And then I found, I don't know if it was Laughing Witch, or I think it was maybe Descent of Manosphere, Kevin's Descent of Manosphere series. Because I have a distinct memory of being at a conference, which I know is held in September, and getting ready in the morning and just putting Kevin's playlist on and watching his playlist of videos about all of the different people in the manosphere. And they then it ended up like I've ended up following the Laughing Witch controversy, and I'm not quite sure how, but I got invited by Laughing Witch into a group, which at the same time held Jenny McDermott, who is like person non grata, like very quickly, because of her self-destructive behaviors. But then through that group is how I met Kevin, and we started like in this group having chats and becoming friendly. And then I think I invited him on my channel, or he invited me on his, and we just like we got along really well. He makes me laugh, and also he loves politics as much as I do, like obsessively. I think as obsessively as he loves sports, and so it's we're kindred spirits in that way. And I think he appreciates my academic rigor and my depth of knowledge on some issues, and so we ended up being like a very good combination. So despite the fact that at the time I'm still friends with Christiosity, still friends with Steve, still friends with Michael Rollins, sorry, but he's not making content to my knowledge anymore. Tim Devotivator Opinion was just so on the Bernie train. I couldn't deal with it, and I don't even know if he's making content anymore. So there are some people from that crew that I've maintained relationships with. Other people have stopped doing YouTube. But out of that, Kevin and I have just, we've kind of like, we were a pair. We became really good friends, and it's despite the changes in politics and anti-feminism no longer being fashionable, that friendship has been sustained over probably 4 or 5 years now, even though we've never met in person. Had a couple chances, but it always fell through. So we've only ever talked online. We've never met in person. Yeah. So I think Katie Porter is amazing, and her whiteboard. I think that in terms of a future Nancy Pelosi, people can be mad at Nancy Pelosi for not being left enough, but I tell you, her job isn't to be the most left politician in Congress. It's to win majorities, and she needs to win majorities by figuring out messages that appeal to purple states. That's why we did very, very well in 2018. We were focusing on healthcare issues. And I don't want to say that we shouldn't discuss issues like criminal justice reform, but we should be discussing it, I think, in terms of criminal justice reform, which, if you get to the bottom of defund the police, is criminal justice reform at the base of it. I mean, I guess there are some people who are outright abolishing, but that's just not going to play in Pewaukee or, in other parts of rural America. So we need to get back to connecting things to people's lives. And I think also with the opium epidemic, hitting the white community, there is more of an empathetic understanding of how, police resources, we shouldn't be focusing on incarcerating people with addiction issues. We should be focusing on recovery and addiction therapy. Also, when someone is, when the police are called out for someone who is maybe high in public, you don't need an armed response for that. You could have social workers who are, backed up in case the situation gets dangerous. So Katie Porter is a wonderful communicator. I think that's ultimately what people find appealing about her, is that she ends up using very common language, and she knows the sort of point she wants to make when she starts. So yeah, I mean, I think that the thing is that we're very lucky. There are so many wonderful women, and I don't want to exclude possible men from leadership, but let's just, focus in a little bit on women in the House. There are so many talented women from so many backgrounds across the country that are coming up now who, and I think it helps. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, she comes from San Francisco. She knows what a left-leaning community is like, but she also has a very pragmatic approach to the exercise of power, and she doesn't bring up a vote unless she doesn't bring a bill out to the floor unless she knows she has the votes. She waited and bided her time despite all of the criticism, despite all of the calls for impeachment when there wasn't grounds for it, to find the right moment. And when it presented itself, she struck and she got, a very strong impeachment case. So I think that it's not just enough to be persuasive and charismatic. I think you really need to be tactical. And in all honesty, if I had to pick between a completely ruthless, like calculating tactician and someone who made my heart flutter, I'm going to take the tactician. And that's the difference between, I think, me and a lot of leftists, and it's why a lot of leftists don't like me, is because I don't want to get elected the people who speak to what I want. What I want in America is much farther left than what I think we can get. But I think it's more important to get what we can get. I think the exercise of power and getting 20% of what you want this year as a foundation for getting another 20% next year is how you move forward. And yesterday on Twitter, someone was like, oh, Biden's not going to ban fracking. And I'm like, well, actually, yeah, he on federal lands, he can do that with an executive order. He's already talked about it. And they went, well, that's not going to be enough, and they should do it on private. Like, well, you can't be mad at someone for not doing things they can't do. Like, Biden can't legally, without an act of Congress, ban fracking anywhere except on federal land. So if he says he's going to do it, why don't you just accept that as a win and acknowledge it? And then just when he's going to talk and not do anything. I'm like, just GTFO out of my mentions with this. If you've already decided before he's taken office that everything he's done is never going to be enough and it's going to be crap and he's terrible, like, then why are you? Why are you even in politics other than to be angry at things? Like, you're never going to accomplish anything with that attitude. And so I'm very much a half a loaf type of person, and that ends up making me out to be a bad person because I'm a neoliberal or whatever else, just because I'm practical. So yeah, I think, as much as they say, Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line, I think Democrats should want someone who can win. That's it, and if it means gradual change, and especially, I'm going to call out white leftists here. I'm going to call out not even like liberal, like left leaning, but you can't get everything you want next week. You can't get 1,000% of what you wanted last week. And that doesn't mean the people who are working on it are evil, because they don't give you exactly what you want. And I think that's kind of the line I'm making in the sand in my head right now, is the people who actually have a practical understanding of politics and a realistic one, and people who are just sort of like whipping up emotions for the sake of it without an actual practical way to implement it. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the civil rights movement, if you look at the struggle that African Americans and Black Americans have endured, then we should know from their experience that change takes place over decades. And sometimes it happens faster. But look at the fastest change in my lifetime has been the shifts on attitudes toward marriage equality and LGBTQ people. And on the T side, it still lags. I think LGB got mainstreamed way faster than the T in that movement. So let's take aside issues of trans rights and equality, because I still think that those lag behind people who are cis, who are gay, lesbian and bisexual. But let's look at the issue of marriage equality. In the 90s, they were, Karl Rove in 2004. Was it 2004? 2000, when, no. It was, 2000, I guess it was. Yeah, 2000 and 2004. They were putting on state referenda to ban same-sex marriage in order to turn out their base, because that attitude was so popular. And now you've got states that are putting marriage equality into their state constitutions in 2020. But that still took, you want to talk about from Stonewall, right? So let's say the 1970s to, let's call it, from marriage equality 2012, I think it was. Or was it? Yeah, 2012. I was living in Germany, I think, when it happened. That's still 50 years. That's still 50 years. And that's on a civil rights issue. That's not even transforming economic structures. So you can't game out progressive change in 2-year election cycles. Republicans didn't stack the Supreme Court in 4 years. The Republicans have been working on stacking the Supreme Court since the 1980s. It's a multi-generational plan of power, and they are moving. People call Mitch McConnell a turtle. Slow and steady wins the race. They have their focus on judges, on bringing down Roe v. Wade, and they just keep plodding along. And they win elections, and they do what they can. They lose elections, and they bide their time. So all of this progressive, I need my change now, bring about the revolution, it ends up being self-defeating because the people get mad that they don't have exactly what they want yesterday, and they take themselves out of the political process. And then you end up never achieving what you want. So yeah, like, call me pragmatic, call me an incrementalist, call me or whatever. But that is how, looking at politics, that's how change is made. And so at the end of the day, I'm always going to argue for what I think is electable, not what I want. And people conflate this. People conflate what I actually think politically with what I think we can achieve. And it's always about, moving things forward. And sometimes the population goes a bit farther left than where I think they are, and in which case I'm ready to recenter myself farther left. But yeah, how did I get on this? Okay. I'm so thick. Thing is, this cuts me off. So I've got really big boobs. I'm actually not so thick as you would think looking from here. It's just that where the camera cuts me off, you can't see my waist. So there. Electoral politics is the short-term game. If there is a electoral politics is the short-term game, and there is a long-term game. You should want to play both at once, if I can paraphrase. Yeah, I mean, you have to win election on election. But winning the battle isn't winning the war. And you need to, that whole thing about judges, the Republicans were out of power, they were in power. They were in power in some states, out of states, but they always had their goal in mind. So yeah, obviously you need both a short-term plan, which is what are the topics that are going to move people today, and those generally, I'm going to say economic issues change around the edges, but economic issues at the people vote their pocketbooks, and there are other things that pop up. But end of the day, we need to make an economic argument that people will buy, and bringing down capitalism isn't going to work with somebody who's just started their own small business. And this is it. Our discourse can't just be for the working class, because people oftentimes don't identify with that aim. So if one thing is Medicare for all, what are you going to say to seniors who are already on Medicare? What's your economic message to them? Yeah, you need both a short-term game and a long-term game. You have to think about it like baseball, right? I mean, I don't know how cricket works, but you've got a 3-game series, but you've got 108 games in the whole year. So you need both a long-term and a short-term strategy. You need to win these games in front of you, but you also need to win the long game. All right, is the Georgia GOP civil war going to help Warnock and Ossoff or have no effect? I think Georgia is an uphill climb. I really, really do. Ossoff went head-to-head, and he still lost in a year where Biden took the top of the ticket. And I think we need to look at that. So, I mean, on the one hand, it's Georgia, yes, it helps us just, if you wanted to put a score on it. And I realize the light is so bright, I'm not always looking at the camera, in which case it's kind of awkward because I end up looking off to the side, but I can just blind myself. It's got this ring of light on it. I can't show it to you. It's the camera. But when I look into it and I look away, I'm just I've got, dazed. But I'll deal with it. Yes, it helps that the Georgia Republicans are fighting. Absolutely, insofar as it just makes them more disorganized, and it will potentially kind of hamper some of their organizational abilities. However, to your average voter, that's just noise. To the person who's got worries about their job and their COVID, like situation at their work and their kids at their school, that is just don't overestimate the impact that that's going to have. The question I think Georgia will come down to, personally, yeah, I am an incrementalist. Yes, damn me. Is having Trump at the top of the ticket turned out 5 million more people, not in Georgia, but nationally, turned out 5 million more people than in 2016. That is an accomplishment. It wasn't enough. He didn't win. But I think we should not underestimate that he realized a goal of Karl Rove, which was basically to keep ginning up and juicing up the white conservative voter in America. Trump did that. The question is, will Warnock and Ossoff, will Loeffler, and I don't even know who the other guy is because I don't pay attention, but the two Republicans, will they be able to motivate the election year voters that came out for Trump? And the same goes on the side for Biden. Now, on the Biden side, the good thing is Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams is the reason why Joe Biden won Georgia. And not her individually, but she spearheaded that entire movement. And it was her organization, her efforts, the people she allied with, the volunteers. And so I think in that, you'd have to kind of give the tick to the Democrats. But in all honesty, people don't vote as often if there's not a president on the ticket. That's just like how it works. And I think maybe what I'll do is, sorry, I'm going to move my camera. I'm still futzing with this. It might be easier if I move that here. Okay. Yeah, that seems a little bit easier for me to look at now, because before it was sort of in an awkward place for me. So, except now I gotta, hold on. Tip it up a bit. Yeah, that seems okay. So on the other hand, a plus for the Democrats is that Trump voters might not turn out. A plus for the Democrats is that Stacey Abrams is still working. And I think a plus for the Democrats is that people who voted by mail in the November election are now experienced with the process of voting by mail, and therefore it will be easier to get them to vote by mail this time. Whereas the Republicans will still have to do same-day turnout. I think that there is, if it's going to depend on the efforts to get people to vote. I know that sounds like saying it's going to rain tomorrow if the clouds have a lot of water in them. It is a bit stating the obvious, right? But if people who found voting by mail very easy are ready to do it again very quickly, then the Democrats will just have the same experience of banking a lot of votes. Whereas the Republicans are going to be relying on same-day turnout because their base isn't going to change at all. So in some ways, it's almost like they're playing two different games in Georgia. I think if I were to tip the scales in a direction on the Senate level, just because Ossoff wasn't able to clear 50% with Biden at the top of the ticket, I think it is going to be an uphill climb. And I don't think it's going to be a split like Ossoff wins or Warnock loses or Warnock wins or Ossoff loses. If it's going to be, it's going to be 2-0 or 2-0. Either the Republicans will get both or the Democrats will get both. And I feel better about our chances than I would have 4 years ago, but I am not counting on those two seats. I would not at all be surprised that if Mitch McConnell was still majority leader after in February of next year. By Pagan Man, I think a lot of leftists don't understand that most of the yes, I am being dazed by technology. There was a good point that a lot of leftists don't understand that most of the wins for the right came incrementally. Absolutely. If you look at their agenda was about, you get people to graduate from conservative schools like Liberty University, and then you get them into a law school where you keep them conservative, and then you get them a lower level judgeship, and then you get them on the federal bench, and then you get them to like they have had this voter suppression laws. You know, do you guys know about the ALEC, the American Legislative Executive Council? That is basically, I want to say it's like funded by, you know, like the Koch brother types and the Mercer types, and they bring all of these Republican newly elected people together in a conference, and they train them in like, here is our agenda on voting rights, and then they give them cookie cutter legislation to take back to their states to achieve something like, you know, voter ID laws that are targeted at Democrats and targeted at people who, black people voted in whatever, or how to do gerrymandering. And so you get all of this cookie cutter legislation that's centralized from a right-wing point of view, and the legislators don't have to understand the law, right? They just come and say, oh, to the people who, so I don't know if you guys know how things work in a legislature, but when a person, go smoke your kush, shizzle pack, nice one, build the wall. Yeah, that wall ain't going to be built now, isn't it? Yeah, so when you're a member of the legislature, you don't write your own language because they don't have the proficiency in statutory language construction. So you would call the people, I can't remember what the name was in Wisconsin, but you say, okay, my legislator wants to create a bill that would cap tuition in the state of Wisconsin at 33% of the cost of education. And then you give it to somebody who basically translates it into statutory language. But at these ALEC conferences, you know, they would just say, oh, we want to, you know, create a voter ID law that makes these kinds of ID valid that's issued by the state, but these other types of ID not valid, even though it's issued by the same state governmental entities. And they just, you know, they've been doing this year on year. So absolutely, they don't go for revolution, you know, until they're ready to make their move. You know, like putting the court. So, you know, they're gonna, they've been pushing at Roe v. Wade every year. They've been throwing up cases trying to get it overturned at the same time they're packing the courts. So yeah, we need more than a 10-second, you know, attention span for that. It's about time online voting was figured out. There's so many ways to make it secure. I personally am old-fashioned in that I like paper ballots. I really do like a paper ballot because at some point there is a, you know, a physical receipt, and I'm just old school. I'm not UK old school and like voting in pencil. Voting in pencil? Who votes in pencil? Sorry, Kevin, defending that crap, but no, it just like, who votes in pencil? That is weird to me. So, yeah, I'm just gonna scroll back up, see if there are any other questions. Gareth says, I'm legally blind individual. I can vote electronically in Canada. I say we roll that out for everyone. Absolutely. So if that's a build on, absolutely. I think in terms of issues of people who have barriers or disabilities, same thing with like multi-language ballots. I don't think there should be any barriers to that. So I guess it depends on what you mean by voting electronically as well. I think for me, as long as there is a receipt printout, a double copy, something that, you know, if you can as a voter get a copy of, and there's also a copy that can be counted in the case of a recount, whatever else. But I like a paper trail. So it's maybe I'm misunderstanding what you meant by electronically. So I think you can definitely make it faster, but if you're going to have vote by mail, then, you know, you are going to need some sort of Scantron system or other way of counting those votes too. And maybe it's just, you know, not about having a one-size-fits-all voting structure. Maybe it's about figuring out how people can vote easiest. And if you want to do an in-person ballot, or if you want to, you know, log on and have some sort of receipt that's verified, or, you know, two-factor authentication, kind of process. I think we should look at that. Although, in when we look at how we're going to spend our money on elections, there are a lot of needs in terms of just getting machines that work and getting more machines so that people in deprived areas don't have longer wait times than people in affluent areas, that I would rank a little bit higher on. So we absolutely should have a multi-language ballots. Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, what language you speak. You don't have paper ballots in Indiana. Get on that. Get a member of your state legislature to get paper receipts. I mean, currently Indiana isn't a swing state, but one day it might be. Yeah, that just scares me, like not having a paper receipt. I don't trust machines 100%. Like, I don't mind them to like do the initial work, but just because of hacking or software problems, not even nefarious election problems, I've watched people try to build websites. Okay, look at lotuseaters.com. I don't want a machine to suddenly, go on the fritz and lose stuff. So I'm old school that way. Yeah. I think it was going to be a short show today, mostly because, like I said, I didn't have too much to say. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about going forward. Yeah, about an hour. I will have more to say next week. So, and I need to stop saying so. 404 of a cod is a great line. So Robert says, I wanted so much to have nothing to touch. I've always been selfish that way. Well, I don't, maybe what we need to think about is multi-mode methods of voting. I mean, for people, I mean, I do think that no matter how you vote, you need some sort of receipt. Whether that's a photocopy that you've dated and signed, or, something else that you can print off, or someone else can download your choices and create a paper receipt. But there should be a thing. Hey, Bruce, I enjoy listening to your D&D sessions. Why do I like it? It's not it's not an something thing, Christy. Sorry, I don't know what it's not an something thing. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoy listening to the D&D sessions. They are more podcasty than visual, because to do the visual ones, you need, like, everyone has to have a camera and be on camera, and I can't organize all that thing. So why do I like D&D? Well, so here's a little. I grew up very much enjoying, like, I was always attracted to the kind of fantasy genre, and I remember reading Dragonlance. Oh, Dragonlance as a kid, that was wonderful escapism for me. And played in high school as well, although I didn't have a lot of money and didn't have access to a lot of books. And so my playtime, I was playing a paladin. I wasn't doing a very good job at playing a paladin, because they used to be really, really rigid, the kind of paladins they had. Played in college too, and I was always, like, there was a girlfriend and I who played with two other guys, but then, like, by the time I got to college, I was the only woman who was playing. So it tends to be kind of like a cis guy thing. It's very skewed, and it's very white, although they're working on it. But it is I think they're trying to be more inclusive, which I like. But anyway, and now with, so V, actually, when I was still talking to V, maybe now after Trump, I'll talk to him a little bit if he's not so annoying and constantly just making me defend everything on the left he ever sees. But he was looking for someone to play in a game, and I hadn't played in ages, so this would have been like 2018, playing. And then Chrisiosity said that she wanted, like, a left-wing place, like a D&D for left-wingers, people who would be open to that kind of game and those kinds of values and doing those kinds of adventures. And I jumped on that. And it's improvisational storytelling. So I guess there are two. I don't know if you're going to regret asking this question first. Let me explain. Oh yeah, the first two Dragonlance series. Oh yeah, and then I followed up with Raceland and Cameron and their adventures after that too. But from a player's point of view, what I like from a player's point of view is, ultimately, D&D is like a problem-solving situation. And I think I also like D&D for similar reasons that I like true crime, where there's a resolution and the baddie is caught. I think innately a lot of people connect with a sense of justice and justice being done. When we see a wrong, we want to know that there are consequences and people are held accountable. And there's an uncomfortableness when we see people getting away with wrongs in the world. And in D&D, there's usually some sort of challenge or baddie, and whatever adventures you go on, you're solving a problem, even in a fantasy world, or you're helping people in a fantasy world. And in all honesty, you can be way more efficacious in solving those problems in D&D than you can in real life. In real life, I can give money to a candidate and I can vote, but I can't in any other, and I can make videos, but I can't stop fascism by hitting it with a sword. And in D&D, I can. So I think that there's a little bit of feeling a bit of more efficacious for me. This is just me personally, that there's a problem-solving element, there's an efficacious element, and then also there's a group dynamic of improvisational storytelling. So if there's a surprise, you never quite know what's going to happen. And in the end, you also end up building camaraderie through shared experience with a group of people. And as I moved into, COVID time, D&D became far more important to me as a social connection with people. And also because of all of the stress associated with the lead up to the election and the rampant COVID spread, especially in the United States, I needed a mental escape. And D&D very much became a place where I couldn't think about COVID for 4 hours, because I was too busy figuring out what spell I'm going to cast in this combat situation, or how I'm going to role play with this non-player character that Chrissy has invented in order to get some information. And because I can't physically go on vacation in 2020, D&D is a way for me to go on vacation in my mind. I can go to a fantasy world where I'm walking through a woods and I can smell the pine, and the sun is, I can feel the sun on my skin, and, I can hear the crackle of people as they walk over small twigs and branches as we make our way, to the Druid enclave or whatever. And so it became like a little mini vacation. And so that is how I, Gareth, I agree. Sargon treats me like trash. So I absolutely agree. Fizbin, yes, Fizbin the Fabulous, and his feather fall of the Kinder. What was his name? Tasselhoff. Anyway, you're getting me back in my Dragonlance days. On the other side now, as a dungeon master, so I'm thinking about, I always think about making videos and whether or not I have time for them. But early on, it was just about mastering all of the different pieces of running a game and getting a feel for it. And I think in the last couple of weeks, I've very much finally found my groove as a DM. I'm not panicking before every session, which I was earlier on. But the nice thing about being a dungeon master is, sort of like, it's like when you invite people to your house for a nice meal and you think about what they would like and what they would enjoy. And you also think about, at least for me, I should say, what other little elements or things can I bring to it that makes it special? So having run this campaign, I've now very much built a world that I can go to in my mind. And in that world, I can do whatever I want, but my job is to create a place where I create challenges for my players. And as Matt Colburn said, your job as the DM isn't to solve the problems that you set out for your players. Your job is to solve the problems the players create for themselves, trying to solve your problems. So I have a sort of like a God's eye view of what generally a narrative would look like, but at every given moment, it's up to the players to kind of decide how they're going to react in each situation. So, for me, the fun part about being a DM is I end up getting to build a story that plays off of decisions that the characters make. And I have a general arc, but I don't know how we're going to get to that arc because how the players choose to role play their characters or react to situations, I always need to be open to the improvisational idea of saying yes. So very recently, I'm going to try to be vague because there's a player in my chat. Yeah, Tasselhoff Burfoot. Yes, he would be shouting nerd. The players were meant to do something and get some information that they didn't. All right, I'm going to be very super vague about it. But in another encounter, they created an opportunity that I hadn't foreseen. And so rather than because it was a surprising interaction and I wasn't expecting that to happen, instead of just going, no, that's not actually what's on my list of things to do, I said yes to that interaction. And as a consequence, I realized that the things that they were going to miss out because of something they didn't pick up on earlier, I now have another way of bringing back into the story. So it's a constant sort of movement of narrative and a give and a take of interactions. And yeah, I think it's being a DM is so much more work than being a player. But on the other hand, it's a lot more exciting and innovative because while a player has control over the situations they're in, as the DM, you have control over what situations your party can experience. So I feel like I'm becoming a really good DM. So am I a nice DM or a mean DM? I watch some D&D sessions where the DM is just brutal. I think I'm quite a nice mistress. I think I'm a very gentle mistress. I don't actively try to kill my party members or give them encounters that I know are deadly. On the other hand, in the spirit of that improvisation, if the players were to put themselves in a situation and got themselves killed, I think then I would, and it was, a roll of the dice. It was something beyond my control. Then I would have to let that play out. Because there's a couple, like with D&D, it's actually pretty hard to die, one. And two, even if they got to the point where they had like killed off their own character accidentally or by circumstance, they can still do gentle repose, and it could become a mission for the other party members to bring that person back from the dead. So, from my perspective, I'm never trying to, be mean to them. I never try to trip them up. I always root for them. I don't know if people notice this. Yes, I'm too nice. I mean, when they do well, I cheer for them. Like I am playing the people they're fighting, but I'm always very happy when they win, which is a really kind of weird situation if you think about it. Like, yay, you killed the character I developed. Woohoo, way to go. But that's it. They're heroes, and I want them to walk away from a situation feeling like heroes. That's kind of the point. There's, again, the efficacy of D&D that you just don't get in real life. And I think there's an endorphin boost that comes with those kinds of success, and dopamine. And it's interesting, actually, that we talk about this now, because I'm giving a training at work on using storytelling to explain science. And normally, a lot of these programs out there are about explaining science to non-scientists. But I need to be able to justify telling stories to scientists, which is different. But during the course of watching it, I watched a guy named, I don't have my notes with me, something J.P. Phillips, maybe. If you go and look at Death by PowerPoint, let's look him up. He did a very famous talk, a TED talk called Death by PowerPoint, and he's got completely valid points about how bad PowerPoint is for attention and structure and everything. You're loving the description of D&D. Good. And das freut mich sehr. That makes me very happy. He also gave a really amazing talk about storytelling. So, death by PowerPoint comes right up. David J.P. Phillips. And this he's got his own channel, and he really likes to analyze communication and storytelling. And in one of his TED Talks lectures about storytelling, he talks about the emotional, the physiological responses that you have to a good story. And they're the three that I just listed because they're the three he talks about. I'll bring this up. I don't know if you guys can't see that properly. Let me move it over there. Now you can see it. I can also move myself. Boop. Okie dokie. So David J.P. Phillips. I would honestly very much recommend people watch this talk, because I do think that this gets to the heart of why people enjoy playing D&D in a sort of improvisational storytelling setting. When you tell a story, first off, people become emotionally invested oftentimes, even if it's just temporarily. They identify with either the person telling the story, or they become more emotionally invested in the person who's speaking it. The magic science of storytelling. This is the one you want to watch. Fabulous, fabulous talk. And he talks about the 3 chemicals that are produced in your brain when you are listening to stories, and the different types of stories that elicit different types of chemicals. If you are telling a story that it has a cliffhanger, that has drama and suspense, you get a dopamine rush when it's resolved, or in the build up to it, and then you get a release of this dopamine. D&D is very much about dopamine rushes, because there is a lot of, every time you have a battle, there is a lot of suspense if something's going to work or not. Every time you roll the dice, even not in battle, you're trying to convince someone of doing something, and you've got to do an insight check or a perception check. There's that moment of suspense, like, how am I going to roll? And then you either go, oh yes, or oh no, or maybe, did I get it? And then you learn what happens. So it's a constant sort of like dopamine hit. When you laugh, there's an endorphin rush, right? So when there's inadvertent comedy or deliberate comedy, I know I was like, besides my drifting accent, like in the last 2 sessions, I've managed to make my players laugh out loud really hard, and by just drawing on the comedy of the moment. And so that is also an emotional rush. And then when you get caught up in those kinds of stories, if you rescue someone, or if your party works well together, you end up releasing oxytocin. Oxycontin is the drug. Oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical, right? So when you go through something with other people, even with like the DM, I can feel that since the first session, people have found their characters, and the dynamics are growing more, and the party is sort of finding their way. And those shared experiences and drawing on old jokes, like the fact that Clue is still going to be the color green because he got caught up in a trap in the earlier sessions on, all of those create those sort of positive emotions. So I think that it is about the storytelling, but ultimately there are a lot of positive chemicals that get released when if you have a good group. I mean, obviously, if you have what they call a bunch of murder hobos, and everyone's just out there for themselves and they want to kill everything and steal their gold, you're going to have a very different experience. But I play with grown-ups. I play with people who want to play for a love of the story and a challenge, and to be caught up in a world, an escapism, a very healthy social bonding kind of escapism where people come together to solve a problem. And so I think in that way it's very mentally positive and mentally healthy. She's a great DM. Oh, thank you very much. Hey guy, DN fan, I'm glad you love your husband. Someone I was talking and rambling on. So someone who else is wrong speak author. Yeah. Oh, Bruce. Good DMs have fun getting other people to have fun. Absolutely. I definitely took on Matt Colburn's tip, which is if your players had a good time, you had a good time. And that sounds like a little bit of a cheat, but that is the metric by which I kind of feel like it's my feedback on whether or not what I'm doing is right. And so if people walk away from the session and they've got an endorphin boost, a dopamine boost, if they're in a better emotional place than they were when they started the session, or as good, then I feel like that was a good session and that's my reward. Also, I really enjoy, the more that we do it, the more I'm enjoying being able to like plant seeds of things that I know are going to grow later on. So foreshadowing, like I'm really, I don't try to do it too much, but every once in a while I'll try to foreshadow something, and then I'll see if they pick up on it later on, or if I even remember that I did it later on. So that sounds like really like a teacher indeed. Yeah, there's a lot of analogous stuff between prepping for a course. Like I can see now, like prepping for a lecture that I used to do and prepping for a session. And I'm getting a sense of how much they can cover in one session as well, which is good, because I usually prepare a little bit more than I think they can get through in case they throw a curveball at me. So sometimes, like, I know they think okay, again, trans gamer girls in the chat, but I know you guys think you have free will, but the number of times that I've done session notes, like they're going to do this, then they're going to do this, like I prep out all the stuff you're going to do, and then you just do exactly what I think you're going to do. And part of it is I'm leaving breadcrumbs, like, but on the off chance that they end up doing something I don't expect, I kind of over prepare a couple of things so the session doesn't run long. But Professor Todd Landman once said, you only need to be 1 week ahead of your students in a course. I mean, obviously it's better to know the entire course content ahead of time. But if you were dropped into a class that you had to teach because someone went off sick, and you had to cover 4 lectures or something, you only really need to be 1 week ahead of your students to do that. And that's kind of I know the general arc of where things are going or where things could go. Because at the end of the day, it's their free will. Like if they decide, hey, screw this dragon heist thing, we're going to focus on the orrery, or hey, forget all this, we're going to work on the curse of Thelvar's family and try to sort that out in the next 5 sessions. That might throw me for a loop for, in the game if they decided to do that at the start of the game and I hadn't planned that. But I can work with all those things, because I know where all the arcs are going, so it's very easy for me now. Now that I know I have a handle of the world, I know I'm flexible enough to adapt to whatever their decisions are. And so learning the lessons from improv is, I think, very important. I could talk about D&D for a really long time. I really could. Yeah, so it takes a lot more prep for the DM than an academic paper. Well, jein, as the Germans say. So when you do an academic paper, you're generally doing that from a position of knowing the topic already. And the challenge of the academic paper is making sure you've read around in the topic for any new or missing published results that you need to be aware of, because your reviewers are going to be aware of it. And then actually kind of like doing the work and then writing it up. It takes more prep for D&D in the initial part to, like, I think get a hold of the scope of it. But for me, at least, I'm very easily over a week. And the more I prep, the less difficult it becomes, because now I've got I know more and more, so I'm becoming more comfortable with it. Also, an academic paper has to be so precise and to a word count. So, I mean, they're very different skills. Also, it's way more enjoyable to prep for D&D. So, Christy making the philosophical argument against free will using D&D. Kind of, yeah. I mean, I think that insofar as, you say you have free will, but the fact is that there is really only a small subset of choices that are either A, available to you, or B, within the framework of what someone's going to do. So yeah, in theory, let's just take a really morally out there example. I could run my car into a lamppost on purpose. But in a normal course of the day, if I'm traveling, I'm not going to do that. I might speed. I might roll through a stop sign, but as I'm traveling from point A to point B, my range of options for my free will is really not that wide. It's kind of like, I kind of think about if I have a destination, yes, in theory, free will says I could drive all the way to Chicago to go to from Milwaukee to Madison. But am I ever really going to do that just because I'm free to do it? No, there's no rational reason for me to do those things. So the rational subset of all of my possible choices is really quite narrow, which means not so much that I have free will, it just means that I'm very predictable. Insofar as I'm limiting myself to these smaller subsets. And I think that that's kind of how it works with D&D as well. I control the series of things that the players can do. And yeah, in a completely free will perspective, and again, I don't know all of philosophy on free will, so maybe I'm not saying anything original here. Probably not. Philosophy is very old. But my characters aren't going to decide one day, okay, yeah, we've got this assignment. We've been assigned to go investigate whether or not this dragon that's been like popping up and scaring sailors in Waterdeep Harbor, what its intentions are. Is it going to hassle people? What's going on with it? They're not going to wake up and say, yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to travel to Neverwinter and then travel all the way back on a ship to go to the harbor. They're just going to go rent a boat at the harbor because that's rational. So I don't have to, so I think that's the kind of thing. You have free will, but you don't, insofar as you're predictable, because your rational set of choices limits your range of free will. Good case study, use D&D and observe how well a good DM can kind of curate the environment as a demonstration that people mostly respond to their environment. Yeah. Like hiding a dragon at a farm 3 sessions back. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the players always feel when they get up, they have and they do. They have free will to choose the way that they solve any problem. The thing is that they're just predictable. Like how they're going to solve the problem is usually predictable. Not always, but usually. And as a consequence, that allows me to have a general preparation of a consequence for any of their choices, or a prepared series of things that happen when you do X, then happens Y and Z. Bruce says suspension of disbelief, moral consequences, boredom, anachronisms. Where are you on these issues as a DM? I think that I've never had problems with players suspending disbelief. I think you have a willing suspension of disbelief when you come into it, and as long as the world that is created does not demand more than your expectations, you're working in a world of magic, but that doesn't mean that things happen without a reason. So part of my work as a DM was to understand the science of magic in the world that I lived in, so the things that I do are consistent with what people already understand, right? And so as a consequence, if I want to, like I've, for Thelvar's character who's got a curse, Trans Gamer Girl in the chat kind of just said, here's the thing, play with it. And I'm like, oh, okay, like here's a whole new storyline. I had to build a storyline, but within the world constraints, so that the suspension of disbelief of the characters, I can't introduce things that don't make sense to them. It has to make, it's like world building in any other way. Like the rules have to be consistent, like vampire rules, right? If you go see a vampire movie, they can alter or change the rules of vampires. Like they can be outside, but they're sparkly. As long as the rules are applied consistently, audiences and players are generally willing to accept it, as long as the world is reliable, And moral consequences. Yes. It's interesting in our game because we have some morally gray players. Not everyone is on the good side. Now, that doesn't mean that so in D&D, I think D&D has become more morally nuanced over time. The first editions didn't even really pay attention to morality. And now we've got sort of like this difference between chaos and structure, lawful and chaos. And then you have people who are good and neutral and people who are bad motivations. But even someone who is chaotic, evil, it can just mean that they're a bit selfish and in this, they're not, they don't necessarily have to be an evil character to have an evil alignment. You can kind of think about it like Yeah, like maybe more like a nihilism, like nothing matters, so why should I do good if it doesn't benefit me personally? That's very different from someone who sacrifices everything for the moral good. And creating situations where the characters are going to have to confront moral questions is something that I think you should do as a DM, because it kind of gives your characters a chance to react to that situation, and it also might shape them in some ways that they weren't expecting. Boredom, I hope they're not bored. So one of the things that I do to avoid boredom is to make sure that there's always something for them to focus on. And I also don't try to do routine stuff. I want things to be very dynamic and not very routine. And anachronisms, that is something that I think we had a session where we introduced a non-binary character. And actually now we've got two. Jarvis is non-binary, as is Fala, and they use they pronouns. There's also more diversity in terms of like Vajra Safar, who is the most powerful magician or mage in Waterdeep, is we say in our world of African descent. And I'm trying to be consciously more diverse in the kinds of representations that are in my game. Although, I don't always mention skin tone when I introduce a character. And maybe I should do more often. Maybe I should make more of an effort to describe ethnicity. But on the other hand, too, it also means that in the mind's eye of the person, they can kind of fill that in for themselves. And it's not, it is important and it isn't. Like, like Vajra being a black woman is important for representation. But if I start making it a sort of, I'm wrestling with that myself. But I feel like the game is trying to get out of that edgelord bubble. I mean, D&D has never actively been exclusive, but it's never tried to be inclusive, and there's a difference. When it takes its influence mostly from, the Hobbit and Western medieval structures, then it makes a difference when you try to bring in a samurai culture and East Asian cultures as well, because that then increases the number of people who feel a connection with it historically. So, hey Flint, how you doing? Wrong Speak author says, I like speculative fiction stories that explore the idea that free will is an illusion. It's unsettling to me and fun to explore via thought experiments. Although I ultimately feel like... Thank you, Flint. Bring it in for a hug. Ah! By the way, who was it that recommended this camera last time? I still have to thank them. It's a really good camera. I'm very happy with it. Good morning. So Bruce says, your characters decide to torture a prisoner as a DM. How would you respond? So one of the things that's interesting in now this particular campaign is that they are in the city of Waterdeep. And the city of Waterdeep has very specific laws. It includes, like if you commit a murder, you can be brought up on charges. If you impersonate a noble, if you try to charm someone without their consent and they file a complaint. And so in this particular game, they have an outside force that's not me potentially hanging over them. But one of the things that happened is they lied they didn't lie to the police in the game. However, despite being warned that withholding evidence was a crime according to the city laws, they decided to withhold evidence and withhold information from the police. So then the question becomes, well, what happens about that? Let's say my characters decide to torture a prisoner. As a DM, how would I respond? There's a couple of things. It depends on what you mean by torture. Is it a psychological game that they're playing? Do they cast a zone of truth and against their consent force them to they don't have to answer anything in a zone of truth, but anything they do say has to be truthful because they can't lie. So when we talk about is it psychological tactics, and I don't know if we want to call that torture or not. If there's physiological torture, at the end of the day, they have the free will to engage in those behaviors. However, It's my job as the DM to then weigh up what the consequences of those behaviors are. And I know way more of the backstory than they do at any given time. So if they were to take somebody and let's say, I don't think my party would do it, but let's say a party decides to torture someone and then they let them go. Well, I can now basically give them an enemy, a stalker who's got a grudge against them, who is going to actively try to undermine them, who is, maybe going to get a gang of their friends together and go mess their stuff up. So, in terms of, we call it God of the machine, Deus ex machina. I don't think, I would let my players play that out and make their moral choices as opposed to intervening. But I would also say, like I did with the, provide an opportunity to say, by the way, what you're doing is illegal, just as a reminder. Their choices are their own. How I solve the problems they create, that's my job as the DM. So, Kara Tour is a thing in the Forgotten Realms. I don't know what that is. I'll have to look it up. Flint, you might have, the camera. Well, yeah, you can see. I hope you can see. It's acting beautiful. It's beautiful. It's got a light. I think it can actually make it brighter. Maybe not when it's running. Still, it doesn't have any instructions on the light, weirdly. I touch it and it turns on and off. I think I'm figuring it out. But no, it's brilliant. I absolutely love it. And I think the picture is pretty good. And I like having the ring light as well because it gives me an extra dimension that I lacked when I had lights on the sides. So thank you. I literally went right after the show and immediately ordered it. I was so fed up of my Logitech cameras. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds in case people have any other questions. Oh, we've gone, for an hour and a half. I do enjoy talking about D&D. And if you are interested, if this has piqued your interest at all, hopefully there won't be any problems with my tech cutting out that I've had in the last couple of weeks. But we had I can give you some background on that because it's a past now and you guys probably won't, I don't know if you figured it out, but I can give you a little insight. A session in about a little over 6 hours on my D&D channel. It's D&D with Christy. I can put a little link in the chat for anybody. Can I? Yeah, okay, I can do that. I'll do that really quick. And it's going to be a good session. I always say that because I'm really biased because I make them. But there are going to be some fun things that probably will be revealed. There will be some adventures and challenges given to the players, and there will be some choices, possibly, to be made. And potentially, and this is one of the things I was prepping, is the characters have been invited and have theater tickets. And so I've basically developed the plot of the opera over the week. That they have to wait till the intermission to meet their contact. And this is not spoiler. This is like, I'm not spoiling anything. They know all of this. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what if they ask me what the opera is like? So I sat down and I came up with the plot line of an opera. So at least, I'm covered through the first half. And I've got a sort of, an opera plot set that they can sit through before they go to intermission. And on the off chance that they sit through the rest of the opera, or they might do something else, I don't know. Again, free will, but I've got it covered in case they do. I know what their choices are, so I'm covered either way. Then, I've got the second half of the opera set out too. And that's just kind of fun for me, like it's things I can do over my lunch hour while I'm, like during the afternoon if I'm working on a day, and then over my lunch hour I can kind of like do an hour of prep as a way to relax because I'm stuck in my house. I can't go anywhere anyway. If you do want to check out things on my channel, I have organized them into playlists. So D&D with Chrisiosity, this is, let me see the full playlist. Yeah, this is a very long running series that Chrisiosity started, I think, over a year ago now, where we've been running The Corruption of Lyrune. This is something she's developed on her own. I think there's no module for this game. Chrisiosity, this is all out of her head. She's used some maps that I think were available, but otherwise the story is completely hers, which is very fun. Then if you know R&D, we have a couple different one-offs that R&D has run, and then we've had a one-off that ended up turning into a long-running Underdark campaign. And that's had a lot of twists and turns. It's been so Chrisiosity is like a role-playing, more interactive story, narrative with basically a long narrative arc with a lot of little smaller arcs. Very typical style. R&D likes puzzles and is is a great battle tactician. I've learned a lot from Matt Colburn and R&D about how to push my characters so that battles, well, it depends on, sometimes you want a battle that's easy because you just want to break things up, and other times you need a boss fight. And I've learned a bit through trial and error, but R&D is really a great tactician in that way, and I learned a lot from him, or them. I'm not sure what they use. And yeah, then mine is, I've got my one-offs, my early days as DMing, and then if Dragon Heist, there is one missing session that I need to upload, and I'm sorry about that. There's one missing session that I need to sort out. Maybe I'll just unhide that, because I haven't been able to find the second part of it. So maybe I can do that now. I can go and unhide that one part. But anyway, but you can jump in any point. If you wanted to just catch up before next session, you can do the Fireball Mystery, I think. And part 2 might be out of, they should be in order of the dates, but anyway, I might have to manually order those to make sure they're in the right order. So that is it, and we're playing in about 6 hours. So stop by if you'd want to continue on with the adventure and see what's going to happen. All right, speaking of which, yes, I need to go prepare an encounter in case my characters decide to do it. So I'm going to go and get ready for the afternoon. Should I start at the beginning of the D&C session? I think, what you might want to do is... I think you can, all right, so if you want to jump, I think you can kind of jump in live, because at the beginning of every session, we do a wrap up of what happened last time. And so we have a previously. So you always know, and that we do that across all of the games, the R&D game, Chrisiosity's game, and my game as well. So it's like jumping into the middle of a TV series when you've missed the first 6 episodes. And then at some point you can always go back and watch the first 6 episodes. But if you want to watch it live, then I would say do that. It bothers me that these are out of order, so I'm going to have to do a manual reordering of these. I think you could probably jump in at any point. I mean, when I watch Critical Role, I don't always go from the beginning, because usually what's happening is there's little stories that are always going on. And so you might be confused for the first 15 minutes, but then you'll get oriented. And then if you like it, you can always go back and catch up. But it kind of depends also if you want to spend a lot of hours on it. So you can always, start at the beginning and just use it as a podcast as well. Jump in and then go back. Yeah, I think that's good. Is the opera going to be crashed by a sentient octopus? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not. The other thing too is, there's been some kind of fun things that were happening in the last session too. I can guarantee some jokes. And in the last session, I got to try my Irish accent that migrated over to Scotland, so that was fun. Listen to a little bit of Billy Connolly to try to be more consistent with my Scottish accent when they run into the dung haulers again today. You guys, thanks for a really chill talk. This was nice. But I will try to prepare something educational for next week. And as I said, change the channel up a little bit in 2020, where we do some maybe debunking in the first 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, keep it very focused on one topic, and then move into a more free-flowing, free-form conversation in the second part for the people who like the long, hour and a half, 2-hour shows. Oh, you guys put me in a really good mood, and I'm really looking forward to my sessions now too. So big hugs. Thank you again, Flint, for the $5. I appreciate it. Big hug. Come on, bring it in, everyone. Thanks for the recommendation as well, and thanks, Bruce, for stopping by. It's good to see you. And wrong speak. I'm Scottish by my accent. Migrated over to Ireland. Have a great day, you guys, wherever it is, whenever it is you are, and we'll see each other, if not on the D&D channel, then over on Kevin's channel, where he's permanently hosting the happy hour while he's waiting for his employment to return. And I will see you back here again next week. Mwah. Be well. Bye-bye. Oh, hold on, I gotta get to the right button.